So, le nouveau programme de ILAL, un aperçu de l'année. Et j'ai fait la reconnaissance territoriale, mais on va faire un petit tour de table. Liz, if you don't mind, we'll start with you. We'll make our way around. I see some of you have your cameras off, but if you're able to put them on when it's your turn, participate in the discussions today, that would be really fantastic, greatly appreciated. If you cannot, if you're just here to listen and you're doing other stuff on the side, that's fine. I get it, I understand, and we'll move forward. But if you have the opportunity to let us know who you are, so your name, your school, and why you love teaching English. And if it's really not something that you've done before, or if it's not something you love doing, I wouldn't mind hearing what are some of your concerns in teaching English. So like I said, we'll start with you, Liz.
My name is Liz Lobert. I am teaching at École Rousseau in Brooks. And what I love about teaching English is focusing on communication and language in communication. Our big focus is on kindness, but also on creativity in language and thinking.
I love that. When your focus is not just on the language, but that you use language as a vehicle to talk about certain things. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Liz. Let's move on to Ashley.
Good morning. I'm Ashley Norheim from École Beau Soleil in Okotoks. And I love teaching English because it's just a fun subject. You get to read, to do plays, games. There's such a variety of ways you can teach it and have fun through it. And it's really amazing with the little ones when you finally see it click, the reading. You know, it's always a struggle at first, and it's very rewarding when you see them catch on all of a sudden. It usually happens kind of all of a sudden, and it's fun to be a part of that.
It does. And I have a question for you now that you've said that. Do you see it more in English in grades 1, 2, or 3, that click? And I'm speaking on average.
Yeah, I mean, of course it varies, you know, kid to kid.
Yeah.
I would say more around grade 2-ish. I don't know how we compare to Anglophone schools, but I don't find my grade 1s very strong readers yet. We, you know, they are focusing a lot more on the French and all that. So, so yeah, it's more in grade 2 and 3 that I would say that I tend to see that. There's some that definitely catch on in grade 1 though, but I wouldn't say that it's the majority.
Okay, it's interesting, and I asked that question just so that we're all aware of where our students stand in our communities and how we can move forward with the curriculum that is meant for Anglophone schools, but we teach in part in Francophone schools. So
I'd be interested in knowing if that's what other people see, or if it's different in other schools. That's kind of what other people tend to see.
Yeah, well, you know what, as we go through this little tour de table, maybe we can speak to that question. I think that's very relevant to what we're going to be doing today. All right.
Thank you, Barbra.
Thank you, Ashley. Nicole.
Hello, I'm Nicole, and I teach at l'École Citadelle in Legal. For me, it's my first year that I taught English in a Francophone school, and I just taught grade 3. So it was a little bit of a challenge because I wasn't sure exactly where grade 3s sit with the program because of them starting usually in grade 1. So I found a little bit of a challenge at first to know, like, because they had never been taught English before, right? So they're kind of like little grade 1ers learning their reading and writing and stuff like that. So it was interesting, and I really enjoyed it for the program wise, and they're so excited about it because they can speak English in school. My class, so it was kind of a neat relationship that we build where, you know, they don't get that in the rest of the school because we're speaking French all the time.
That's right. It's kind of taboo everywhere else. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, the English teacher is the favorite teacher. Who knew?
Yeah, they walk in class like they switch right away, and it's just kind of cool to see that. And it's neat. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. That's wonderful. All right. And Christy.
Hi, I'm Christy. So I will be in my first year of teaching at École des Beaux-Lacs in Bonnyville. So I'm going to be here to pretty much listen today and just kind of take in all the information, just because I'm going into my first year of education. So, I guess of teaching, sorry. So yeah, that's what I'll be doing today.
Well, perfect. We're here for everybody from the most experienced to the least experienced. So if you're listening, I think you're going to get a lot out of today's session. I think it's going to really help you. Anyway, that's my goal, is to help everybody be prepared for the fall, be prepared from day one. And so, given that, you're perhaps right out of school, you may have a lot more to share than you think. So stay tuned. And Jessica.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Jessica Dallaire. I'm also at École des Beaux-Lacs in Bonnyville. So this is my second year of teaching, and next year I am teaching English for the first time, which I am stoked about. Just because it's so fun, and I already teach French, and I find that when we're teaching them languages, they really kind of bounce back and forth. So I'm excited to navigate through that. Yeah.
Great. Well, that is fantastic. And again, given that you're relatively new to it, like I said, you're probably going to have a lot more to contribute than you think. And at the same time, you'll have a lot of tools moving forward, hopefully. And this sharing that we'll have today will certainly help us all through this bit of a crunch. I don't want to overload you here at the end of the year, so it's a relatively light session, light in environment, but at the same time, really rich in the sharing that we're going to have going forward. So I really appreciate everybody is perfectly bilingual, which is funny and wonderful. And it's what we hope to give to our students. It's what we hope to give to our kids. It's how my kids are raised as well. And so that switch between the English and the French, the ability to transfer between languages, what they've learned in French, what kind of baggage they come with starting from grade 1, or if they start English in grade 3. So hopefully that's setting them up for success right from the start. So like I said, oftentimes at this time of year, and certainly with a new curriculum, we can feel like we're overwhelmed, overloaded. And what I'm hoping to provide for you today is that life raft, is that just that little bit of support so that you feel ready and prepared for the following year. So some of the things we're going to cover today are the scope and sequence, and really briefly what that means and what it will end up looking like. And we're going to touch on the essential elements that we need to teach, and why is that important. We'll look into that as well. We're looking at an annual planning. So I'm going to propose to you, and I have a document set up that's in 2 semesters, but I can also provide you with one that's in 3 semesters. So don't hesitate to ask for something that I may not be showing you today. And then finally, we'll look at resources, activities, lessons that might be interesting that we could share with one another. And I will also set you up for future collaboration for all of that. So that's the plan moving forward. Normally the session takes about 2 hours, depending on how things go. We may finish a little bit earlier, but I definitely won't push us past that 2-hour mark. So as we look at the scope and sequence, we're really referring to the learning outcomes. So the beautiful thing, and I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the program, we did send it by email in the package getting you ready for today. So hopefully you've had a chance to peruse it. And even if you've just looked at it briefly, you'll notice that the structure is really meant to support the kind of planning that we're working on today. But we're going to be looking at those learning outcomes, and we're going to look at how we can plan throughout the year. When do we teach and what do we teach? It's also, based on how much time we have to teach at given levels. So in grade 1, like I had mentioned, if you have that in your school, the English at the grade 1 level, you're really only got about a third of the time. Grade 2, it's at about half the time. And by grade 3, it's about 2/3 of the time that course would be taught in an English school, or even compared to the French course that's taught. So we focus on how much time we have to teach, what we have to teach at what level. And then it's up to us also decide what concepts linked to the learning outcomes are going to be taught. We don't have to touch everything. We can't in the time that we have. So we want to think about a logical order to address those concepts. And just so you know, my plan for next year for the fall is to focus on conceptual understanding and how to teach to those concepts. I think that's a really interesting way to go about it because it allows us a lot of flexibility in terms of how we teach and what we teach. Like you had mentioned earlier, Liz, teaching, let's say, kindness through the ELA program or ELAL program. My goal when I was teaching English at the high school level was really to focus in on human rights. So I brought in a lot of texts and videos and things like that had to do with human rights. That was my theme throughout the entire year. It allowed me to put into place a lot of projects and work with students on that level. So that character development. So that's how I integrated the progression of competencies. And that's a big part of the structure of the new program as well. So that explains a bit about the scope and sequence. And like I said, I'm really going to introduce you to what that looks like firsthand by focusing in on the essential elements that we do want to teach. So like I said, given the context of our francophone schools in Alberta, yes, a lot of our students come with a great deal of baggage because we're in a minority atmosphere, right? So they're hearing a lot either at home, out in the, their neighborhoods, at the grocery store, at the restaurant, wherever it is that they go. They're also really interested in speaking a lot of English. So we're going to, we'll use that to our benefit to hopefully determine what their baggage might be. And again, we're also looking at the transfer between what they've learned in French, right? Those skills are important. And although we're not talking about the same sounds, we're still talking about the same alphabet. We're still talking about how to learn those sounds. So that metacognition is kind of an interesting aspect to pick up on. So really talking with our students about how they're learning and the kinds of questions that they ask themselves in their heads as they move forward with their language learning. So as I say that, I'm going to move ahead to, there we go, this one. So this document, I will make sure you see it a little bit better. Yeah, there we go. Hopefully you can see this well enough. I wear glasses, but even with my glasses, I don't always see on my Zoom screen as well as I'd like. And so this is the document that will be shared with you. I can also share the grades 1 and 2 documents with you if you are interested. If you've participated in my sessions before, you've already received those documents. And so that's great. But even if you're just teaching grade 3 and you haven't participated in the previous sessions, it might be helpful to have those grade 1, grade 2 documents to see what we discussed in terms of these are the essential elements that we want to teach, and this is the timing of how we want to teach it. So I've put a little legend up at the top. We'll really focus in on highlighting the aspects, but in 2 or 3 different ways. So first off, what's going to be highlighted in yellow is this is what we're going to teach, and it's going to be evaluated. And knowing that there's a big focus on oral language, some of you may not touch too much on writing, right? So that might be highlighted in green. That might be something I expose my students to, but I won't necessarily evaluate. So as we go through this whole thing, keep those things in mind. Also keep in mind that this document will become yours. You'll be able to make a copy and put the colors in that you like. So for example, if you say to yourself, yes, it really does interest me to teach that. Like I have a lot of baggage when it comes to drama. So I love to use improv in my classroom, and even in grade 3, it's possible. And I think it's a great tool to use to teach language. And so that might be something that you're going to focus more on. It may be something that this group decides, well, it's not an essential element. Okay. So that being said, any questions for starters? I think Liz and Ashley, you're used to this presentation already, so that's perfect. So I think we can just get started if there are no questions. And we're going to look at the first organizing idea, which is text forms and structure. And like I said, so if you had a chance to look at the actual laid out curriculum, it's not exactly like this. It's really, really similar. The difference is, there are two differences. The first difference is, if you notice, the understanding here is popped right out, right? So normally it's in that middle column between knowledge and skills and procedures, but we've popped it out just for the sake of mise en page, right? To have a structure in this particular document for our purpose today. That's the first difference. The second difference is we've really just repeated everything in term 1 and term 2. So it's really the exact same thing you'll see twice on both sides of the page. The reason for that is that we can make the decision, well, we're going to teach it all year. We're just going to teach it in the first semester. We're just going to teach it in the second semester. And like I said, if you've got 3 terms, that's 3 reporting periods, which is entirely possible. I'm not sure which conseils do which anymore. But you can certainly ask me, let me know. I need the one with the 3 terms. That way, I can take what we've done today and adapt it to my needs. The last thing I want to mention, which I've forgotten to mention in my previous presentations, was this system of organizing the learning outcomes using numbers and letters. So I mention it today only because it's there, it's present in this document. It was created by one of the consortia in Alberta. It is not something I use, and it's not something I necessarily recommend either. The reason for that is because it was created by a consortium and not Alberta Education. Alberta Education talked briefly about putting this into place. So if they do, or if they have, it won't be the same. And if it's not the same, that just leads to confusion as far as I'm concerned. The other part for me is that I don't really think that we need to code all the learning outcomes. I think it's easy enough to talk about them in sentence form. I think it's easy enough to say, okay, my learning outcome is whatever, 3T1. It's not going to place me in my document. I don't need that. I need to know students relate the form and structure of texts to the communication of ideas and information. For me, the words have much more meaning. And I think a lot of people who, teach languages are like that too. It may be helpful in math. For our purposes, we're going to leave that aside. So if you notice it there and you like to use it, by all means, use the coding system. But like I said, it's not my recommendation. So as we move on to that first learning outcome that I just read out, are we in a position in grade 3 to teach that all year long? Is this something that we want to see in just one of our 2 terms? How do we want to proceed with that? And here's where I'm asking for your input and your participation, because it's all you. It's what you see in your schools, and it's what you do with your students. And I can just flip back to grade 2 to look what we've done there. So in grade 2, just so you know, we've decided we're going to expose our students slowly at the beginning of the year, but it would be evaluated by the second term. So your students should be coming in, if they've had English in grade 2, with a bit of that baggage. So we could proceed in the same ways in grade 2. That is, look at it in the first semester or the first term and evaluate it in the second. It's not a bad way to go, just because, like I said, not everybody teaches grade 2. Not every school has grade 2. So I love doing this work together because as you go through this, as you start your planning, you're going to really be at the forefront of it all, right? If you're working on it, you have a better chance of understanding it. And that's what we teach our students too. Okay, so, and any element within here, like I said earlier, if drama is not your thing, or if it really, really is your thing, it may be something you're going to be more focused on than everybody else in the group. So these are propositions, or these are things that I'm proposing to you, or that we're working on together. But by all means, it is not the end all and be all. It's not written in cement. So as we move on to our second learning outcome, that's the same learning outcome, different knowledge, skills, and procedures. So text features can provide information that's not in the main body of a text. How do we go about this? Again, I'll refer back to the grade 2. And it was all the way through, I think, for text forms and structures. Yeah, looks that way. So everything, as we get closer, it's not quite the same at the last part. Okay, poetry is something. There we go. Oops. There we go. So if you're all right with what they did in grade 2, we'll continue along the same lines. And it's interesting because our students, it seems they're younger and younger each year. When we start to delve into everything that's digital, they really have a lot of that baggage. That's what COVID has given us. So we'll take that, we'll use it to our benefit. Here, fictional texts are often products of a text creator's imagination and are not factual. So these again are, if we're highlighting it in green, it doesn't mean the students aren't going to be exposed to it. Are we going to read to them? Yes. Are we going to talk with each other? Are we going to do show and tell? Then these are great opportunities. These are also great opportunities to integrate First Nations perspective, First Nations, Métis, Inuit. And I think language is the perfect place. It's much easier to integrate those Indigenous perspectives, I think, than in math. And so if you are also generalists and teaching all your subjects, math, for example, I'm just going to mention here that if you're looking to integrate Indigenous perspectives, we will definitely, the consortium will definitely be providing that kind of training to you as well. I think that's an important piece too, right? We're bound to do that, but it's also super interesting. Yeah, yesterday was probably a really good example of that for everybody. It definitely was for me. All right, and yeah, again here, you know, what elements of fiction are we going to include? But we know that in grade 4, they're going to have much more time for English. We know that in grade 4, they're going to have to start with a lot of this stuff. So if we're evaluating it at the end of grade 3, I think that's a good thing. I think that, you know, if we're focusing in on all of the different aspects of a text, that's going to be important for our 3rd graders. And again, I think it's the same thing with our nonfiction texts. And that brings us, does that bring us? Yeah, right to oral language after that. Oops. Sorry, as I make my way through all of the highlighting. And again, here, poetry, I'll leave it the same color. I'll leave it the green in the first semester and yellow in the second. I think poetry honestly is a fantastic way to make learning fun. I think it is a lot of fun. I remember learning all these things when I was about this age. And it gives them something, it motivates them, right? All right, so oral language, as we well know, is kind of a big focus, and as well it should be, right? They're coming to us with some baggage, yes, and they speak it a lot, but are they doing it well, right? And are they preparing themselves for the reading and writing that comes ahead? So again, I'm going to look back to the grade 2 program and what we highlighted here as far as oral language goes, and it was for the first bit all the way through the year. So we see everything, we evaluate everything right from the start. I'm just going to make my way quickly through the learning outcomes. Students examine and adjust listening and speaking to communicate effectively, right? So hopefully this is something that will go fairly quickly, and because it's all year long, it's the kind of thing where you're observing. So checklists sometimes become important, you know, because it's hard to evaluate sometimes some of these aspects simply by giving a project or a test or whatever the case may be, that as you observe your students in group work or oral presentations, well, you have your grille d'observation, you have your rubrics, it's all set out, but sometimes it's just in the everyday that you have in the more informal aspects. So like I said, it's all highlighted all the way through for all of oral language. And I think that would be particularly pertinent for grade 3 as well. They should become masters at oral language by the time they hit grade 4. And just so you know, I know we have, a fair amount of students who are considered ELL or ESL, depending on which term you prefer using. And so oral language, again, there becomes a really, really important element to focus in on. I treat ESL or ELL as I would francisation. For me, it's the exact same thing. It follows the same sort of benchmarks, and I believe, and I received an email today, I'll need to, touch on those benchmarks in the fall, because there are some changes where that's concerned. And I know for francisation, when we're teaching French and all of the other subjects, we're really looking to develop their French. Well, we're trying to do the same thing with English, but they don't hear it in the school apart from an English class. And so there's that added complexity. And so we're also concerned about how we prove, right, what kind of documentation or data we have to show that a student is an ELL, an English language learner, and how they're making their progress, right? So it's not just informal. In the past, I've used the benchmarks and just highlighted after listening to a student, having a conversation, listening to them read, taking samples of their writing, that kind of thing. But I think it's going to be a little bit more involved this year. So I will keep you up to date as I learn more, and I will be there to accompany you as we go through the processes of any changes when it comes to ESL and ELL.
That's a little bit concerning, because I find the reports that I have to do for like so much, like report cards, I think are a lot more difficult for us, because not only does ELA have 8 strands that we need to report on, whereas health has like 1, or gym, or some of the subjects it's just easy, but it's a lot more complicated evaluating the ELA. And then on top of that, you have the ESL reports, and in the past I only had to do one or the other. Now we have student, but now this year they're asking me to do both for like the kids that are in ESL, you have to do 2 report cards for them. So I'm just a little concerned if they're going to be asking us to do yet again more stuff, because it seems every year they're adding more for us to do, but I'm getting less time to do it.
Yeah. I understand that concern, right? I've been in the same boat, and I've seen that evolution in our conseil with regard to the amount of reporting that needs to happen. At an administrative level, I get it, because that data really informs a lot of decisions at the top. At the same time, that data can also inform our planning. And so I try to look at it in that way. And when you're talking about two reports, not everybody here may have that. So I know what you're talking about, right? You're talking about the report that's like a Word document that you have to fill in, I think, at the beginning and at the end of the year. And it just sort of details. It's a report on each student who's ESL, right? For me, that's a big copy and paste, just paperwork for the funding that the conseils get for their ESL students. It's the same thing with francisation. It's the exact same thing. But the real reporting goes on in the report card, like you say, where you determine which palier they're at, where they're situated, what objective they may have, and the comment or the observation with regard to that particular objective or those particular objectives. The nice thing is, and this is what I've often advised English teachers to do, because usually they're specialists and they've got all the English students in the school. So they've got all the ESL students in the school, is like a copy paste as well. And the reason for that is not just to save time, but it's how you're teaching them also, right? You're teaching your whole class and you've got a few students who are ESL. And so how do you tackle all of that? Well, for me, it's as simple as, well, if I focus on certain elements, right, within the strands or within the domains of the language, and I'm teaching all my students and with a particular focus on my EL students, that focus, that emphasis, or that priority in language, then I'm going to do it for everybody. And so my objective is often very, very similar or the same for all my ESL students. What ends up changing is the amount of support that a student may get. So the objective may sound like the student, by the end of the term, the student will be able to read this level book, with this kind of fluency, whatever the objective might look like. And then for the other student next to him or her, it may look like, well, that student will do the same thing, but with an intermittent support or with a more intense support. So it's the support for me that changes and not the objective. So I hope that helps to write your reports, because that is what it feels like. It feels like there's a lot on our plates. We just keep adding to our plates and we don't add time to our plates. And so that's one of the strategies that I put into place that really helped me.
I appreciate that. I do that already, and I find it already takes me many complete days to do the report. So many complete weekends, but I don't know if there's any way around that.
I don't know. I haven't found it yet, but if I do, I'll let you know, Ashley, that's for sure. Definitely. And as we make our way through this new curriculum, hopefully there will be opportunities to improve our practice when it comes to that, so that we become more efficient, but that we're also responding to all the needs of all of our students. It's a big job. We're not heroes. We're human beings. We have families, we have lives, and we need to find a balance. So hopefully we can do that. We can work on that together. And trust me, I will be here all next year to help support where that's concerned. Like I said, whatever new is coming our way in terms of ESL, if I can develop or create certain documents, strategies, or approaches, methods of doing it, well, then that's where I'm going to put a lot of my effort. Just because I want to make sure that you feel supported and you have the time and you feel efficient and competent moving forward. All right. Any questions before I continue, or any other comments? Thank you so much, Ashley. All right, where were we? So I was highlighting all of this in yellow. All across the whole year, we are going to touch on anything that is oral language, verbal, nonverbal communication. That's definitely right. It's even something we're looking at in all of our subjects. How do I listen? What does that look like? What should it look like? how do I do that? Sometimes what we end up saying to our students is, to us, it seems obvious. This is, of course, you should just sit there and listen. But what should you be doing to listen? So there's the element of explicitly teaching things that seem obvious to us. All right, we're moving on to vocabulary, and the learning outcome here, students analyze new words and morphemes to enhance vocabulary. And again, when it comes to English language learners, it's the same thing with Consortium. The focus on vocabulary can be really important. And here I always like to mention that consideration for other cultures, other languages besides English and French, where students are coming from, that's an important element, right? So if we're introducing texts and vocabulary, hopefully before text, then we may also be introducing something, again, here that seems obvious to us. I grew up in Canada, so I know what snow is. I know what it's like to go skiing, to go tobogganing. Not all of our students know that. So if we're introducing texts about making snowmen, it may be the first time they see snow in their lives. And so considerations to that are really, really important. And I know that there are certain tools that we use for assessment. For example, ADEL, A-D-E-L. And so when we use those assessment tools, they come with little texts, and we're just there really to assess the whole class, to sort of pick out the students who have more difficulties in order to plan for them. But what that might mean is that a student may not really necessarily have a learning disability or any real difficulty with reading or writing. What they might have difficulty with is the vocabulary, the language used in the text. And so those assessments, it's important to keep that in mind when we do those assessments. It's also important to keep in mind when we do the teaching, right? So for those students, when we keep that in mind, we're able to introduce to them a whole world of vocabulary that may be new to them. So in grade 2, here, the focus ended up being on, oh, okay, well, we might not touch on this at the beginning of the year. We'll look at it in the second half of the year. So, so things like alliteration or repetition, there is going to be exposure to it, right? And just in the stuff that we read to them or that they're starting to read, homophones, homographs, and all of that. I think by the time they hit grade 3, it's more, let's say, an exposure in the first term and an evaluation in the second term. I think that's where they're at. Does anybody have any other opinion on that? So far, so good. Okay. So they're analyzing new words. That's going to happen. They're going to need to know what a simile is, how to write a sentence with a simile. That's going to happen. What imagery and hyperbole are. Here, when we talk about figurative language, it explicitly says figurative language includes imagery, hyperbole, and simile. That means if we're evaluating, if we choose that as an essential element to teach and evaluate, it includes those 3 aspects, right? So as we make our way through the program, if we see the word includes, it's obligatory, right? If that's what we choose to include. There are going to be other terms which make the laundry list less obligatory, more an option for us to teach. So if it says something like figurative language, what are the words that they used? I can't remember. I had it written down. I'll come back to it. I have that document somewhere. That was part of one of my presentations. Right, so there are certain terms within the context of the program that allows us to say, okay, well, this is not something I have to teach, but it can be one of those things that I teach. All right, and so morphemes include bases and affixes. So something that will expose our students to and get them rolling with it since they were just barely exposed to it in grade 2 and start evaluating. And again, here, once you receive this document, you'll be able to say, oh, okay, well, maybe I won't touch on suffixes just yet. Maybe I'll do that at the beginning of grade 4. And if you're a specialist and you're teaching all the grades, K to 6 or 1 to 6, then you'll see your students evolving and you'll know just how to plan, because you're not just planning for 1 year and one group of students, you're planning for perhaps all your groups of students as they go through all the years of elementary. Okay, so not everybody's context is the same, and that's kind of an important point. And here, and I'm going to go back to grade 2 just to situate us. So in grades 1 and 2, and kindergarten, of course, which we don't teach, phonological awareness is part of the program, but not so in grade 3. It's not there at all. My suggestion to anybody who's teaching grade 3 English is to keep in mind the grades 1 and 2 curricula for phonological awareness, because if you're starting ELA in grade 3, they may not have that. They've learned it in French, but it's not this, they're not the same sounds, right? And so having worked with a lot of speech language pathologists, considering, okay, should I evaluate the student? Do they have a trouble de langage? It's a good question. So the speech language pathologist that I worked really closely with 1 year, she said, well, if by the time they're finishing grade 3, they're not pronouncing, let's say, their R in English the way it should be pronounced, I'll start to worry about it at the end of grade 3, more in grade 4, because they haven't been exposed to it as much as, students in English schools have been exposed to that sound. So we give time for students to develop certain sounds if they're learning 2 or more languages at once. That being said, I would use those 2 grade 1 and grade 2 curricula to inform my teaching in grade 3 and really focus in on whatever phonological awareness, whatever sounds they haven't mastered yet. So go back to those and use those before moving on to your next step. And here, when we talk about phonics, it's foundational literacy. And I will mention that our other consortia in Alberta do provide quite a lot of workshops and trainings when it comes to each aspect of the English language arts and literature program. So I participated in a workshop on phonics. It was given through ERLC, but it was Pearson who was giving the workshop. And Pearson, so now I've sat in on, I think, 3 out of 4 of their workshops. They're trying to sell us products, right? Their resources, which is not a bad thing. We might need to, brush up on some of the resources that we have. But at the same time, to me, I keep in my head, okay, they're trying to sell me a product. Is this a product I really need? And so at the same time, as I sit through those workshops, I hear, okay, this is how they've gone about, making their workbook. So these are some lessons that might be helpful to me. Do I really need to purchase the product to do this going forward? Or what have I learned from this workshop in order to go out and search for my own resources, or look at what I already have and what I already do with my students? But just know that those workshops are available to you. Even though you teach in francophone schools, you don't just have the francophone consortium to rely on, you have a bunch of other ones. And so at the end of my presentation, you'll also have links to those consortia and their websites and the things that they offer. So this summer, and I don't recommend that you work during the summer. No, don't take time off. However, they do have a really good summer literacy program. And I think it's not ERLC, it's one of the other consortia. Anyway, one of the ARPDC consortia. And that link is at the end. And I think those workshops can be very, very interesting, especially so if you're a new teacher and you're trying to establish a lot of resources for your own teaching, that might be the way to go. Okay, back to our program. And I will skip through the grade 2 phonological awareness bit. And here, because it's foundational literacy and we're really talking about reading when we're talking about phonics, in grade 2, we don't tackle it at the beginning of the year. We're looking at it at the end of the year. So I think if we want to follow along those same lines, here we're talking about it's supporting reading and writing, right? Are we going to evaluate it right from the get-go? I think so. I think that's something that needs to be done because it's going to support their reading and writing. And we're going to really have to start writing with these kiddos because in grade 4, it's an exigence. They have to. So is it something that they're going to be evaluated on all year? That's the question. And what do you think? We can even tease out some aspects that will be evaluated and some that won't. Yeah.
So I have the advantage of being able to start this in grade 1.
Right.
But I find that even by grade 3, we need to review all of this stuff.
Right.
So definitely at the beginning of the year, this is something we have to go over.
Okay. And would you, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, would you evaluate it by the time your first report card comes around? I know that with the francophone, the first report card only comes around at the end of January.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For me, because I can start in grade 1, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it would be the same for somebody who only starts it in grade 3.
Okay. So I'm going to highlight all of this in yellow all through the year. Okay. And as you get this, just know that that also becomes your choice. You know, maybe I won't evaluate it in the first half of the year. If I have 3 terms, I won't evaluate it in the first one, but I will in the second one and maybe not in the third, right? So you're going to have options when it comes to this. So like I said, I'm going to highlight it in yellow and you will make those determinations on your own. Just know that because it's so foundational to their reading, and as we study the science of reading, we've learned that it's not simply whole language that works, but a combination of phonics and whole language that works. I learned phonics when I was this age. Honestly, I loved it because it's almost like coding. It's like math, and that can be a lot of fun. That can be a lot of fun for all students. And it really sets them up to be able to put into practice the strategies that they've learned. So I will leave that all yellow. And I think fluency will probably lead us the same place too. Let me just check what we do in grade 2. So in grade 2, fluency, it's all green, right? The focus in grades 1 and 2 is really oral language. So maybe what we're doing here with fluency is we're developing their fluency, right? That definitely. And by the end of the year, we're hoping that they've mastered this, right? We want them to be able to, in English, not just learn to read, we want them to be reading to learn, right? So comprehension is enhanced when high frequency words are read in continuous text at an appropriate pace. Well, we're going to teach them. We're going to look at that together. You know, they haven't had a lot of exposure. They've maybe had none, right? And so seen at the beginning of the year, worked on, and then evaluated at the end of the year. And with fluency, right? Phonics, fluency, comprehension. And if we've got those pillars down, if we scaffold in the appropriate ways, this is what helps us to determine the sequence of how I'm teaching it. So again, here, comprehension, we're not talking about oral comprehension, but text comprehension. And some of our students are going to take a lot longer to get there. We're not talking about the students who are outliers, talking about the average. And then when we talk about the outliers, kids who have learning disabilities, language delays, whatever the case may be, we're going to support them and we're going to remove some obstacles so that they can get there. So their comprehension could be more auditory and less visual. But we want to bring in that whole visual aspect, bring in what they're reading and learning. So again, here, we may be working on it really hard at the beginning of the year so that by the end of the year, they're mastering it. And connections. Oh, this is so much fun to do. And even students who are really struggling with reading can make those connections. That is definitely something that can be worked on. And I even evaluated at the beginning of the year. I wouldn't hesitate to even turn that yellow at some point. And here, learning and come, again, and predictions, teaching them how to do all of that. We don't focus on it in grades 1 and 2 in our francophone schools. So let's really, continue to work on that, expose them to it as much as possible. And here I'll end up probably highlighting a good part of the grade 3 curriculum, even though we only have about 2/3 of the time to teach it. What's going to be put aside is more of the writing aspect, right? And inference. Well, they're learning that in French. They're getting that. That's going to be some baggage that's going to come with them. So we're going to have to give them the words and vocabulary to learn how to do that, how to make the connections and their questioning and all of that. So as long as we're giving them that vocabulary, those terms, they'll be able to get there. And summarizing, right? Using their own words, that's going to take some time. They may have difficulty with that even by the end of grade 3. But relating personal experiences, I think that's the kind of thing that can easily be mastered. All right. And now writing. And writing isn't the last organizing idea. We've got writing and conventions. Maybe we'll make our way through this real quick and we'll take a quick break. That's all right with you, maybe about 5-10 minutes. And from there, we can wrap up the session with the rest of the things that I want to show you. All right, so with writing, if I go back to grade 2, I'm fairly certain that comprehension, we didn't even touch on certain things there at all. And here's where they're learning those questioning words, right? And different elements of what they're reading in order to understand. And so as you can see in grade 2, when we talk about writing, we're not there. Some teachers are going to be able to expose their students to this depending on the group that we have, right? The dynamic, how strong they might be, what they've been exposed to in the past, what they've been able to accomplish in French. This might be highlighted differently in grade 2. But my feeling is that if they're not necessarily going to be exposed to it in grade 2, not necessarily, in grade 3, there should be some exposure to the writing aspect, right? So students investigate writing and research processes that support informed written expression. Maybe highlight this all in green. Maybe certain aspects can be teased out in the second term to be evaluated. I would say definitely there are certain aspects of the writing that should be evaluated by the end of grade 3. So all of this in green. I'll make sure I've got that all good. Yeah. So all of that in green. And then create written text for a variety. I think they're going to be evaluated for some of these aspects, if not all. All right, are we going to focus on run-on sentences at the end of the year? Maybe, maybe not, right? We're going to have to talk about conventions, punctuation. That might be a good, mix together. We would definitely be teaching students fluent writing sounds like speaking when you read it aloud. So there are a lot of aspects that can easily be evaluated by the end of grade 3. Creative thinking. Well, here, creative expression. That for some students is they can run with that. So I don't think that is too much to ask them to be exposed to. And again, maybe continue to expose them to that. And maybe even evaluate some aspects, right? If we're still working on vocabulary, we're still working on descriptive words, we're still working on antonyms, synonyms, and all of that, we'll probably ask them to start including that in their writing. But how much are we going to evaluate? Students demonstrate how attention to skills and strategies can support the clarity of written expression. Well, here, again, they're at the beginning of the process. And so maybe start looking at some aspects at the end of the year or the second half of the year. And keyboarding, things like that might be worked on in French, right? I know many schools that start their BYOD program either in grade 4 or grade 5, sometimes in grade 3. They're, using computers in the school to work on their keyboarding, but they tend to be born with that skill these days. So the thumbs are really strong for my kids. All right, so in terms of writing, we're not necessarily going to cover it all, right? By the time they hit grade 4, they're going to have some catching up to do. They're going to have a lot of work at the beginning of the year, well, all throughout the year, to get them to where their colleagues are in English schools. But conventions, I think, help support writing, right? It helps support how their writing makes sense. When they have good spelling, it flows more naturally, and their writing becomes more understandable. And so capitalization is used for headings. It's used, which words, do we use capitals for, when are commas used? I think that's something that is definitely going to need to be evaluated by the end of the year, because I think that's totally doable for our students. I think there's enough time to add all of that in, right? The apostrophe S when we're talking about possession, how we shorten words in certain ways. What is a sentence? What kinds of sentences exist? So here we're touching on a good deal of the program. I'm highlighting just about all of it, but not all in yellow. Right? We want our students to know how to write there and there and there. Yeah, because we know it drives us crazy when we see it on the Facebook post that it's not written the right way. So we know we're going to be good with that. Students investigate and demonstrate how conventions support written communication. So, sometimes a lot of that is through discovery, right? They're going to be reading, they're going to be exposed to it. How much do we want them to be doing it? And there are a lot of rules in English, a lot of rules that are broken constantly in English. So it's hard to keep track of. It's not a very transparent language. It's more opaque. And here we're talking about spelling. And again, this is the kind of thing that for some of our students they need a lot of support. I don't worry too much about it. It's like using a calculator in math, right? There are a lot of tools that our students can use, but giving them a good basis will help them for the future. Here again, abbreviations, I would expose them to it. I wouldn't evaluate it until the end of the year. And even then, how much would I necessarily evaluate? Those are all questions to ask yourself as you're planning through the year. And so that's our next little bit, right? So like I said, you're going to get your own copy, or you'll get a copy or a copy to make of this document. So that should give you a bit of a scope and sequence, help for your planning ahead. And so I'll come back to my presentation. And when I talk about an annual plan, the structure of the curriculum. Oh, actually, I said we were going to take a little break, and I think it's a good time. Take a little 5 minutes. What are we, 9:35 now? Let's say we'll come back at 9. Let's come back at 9:45. That will give us enough time to have a little break, maybe get another cup of coffee, whatever the case may be. So 9:45, we'll see you back here, and we'll continue with the presentation and some of our work together. And just to continue a bit with annual planning. So what I've noticed with the new curriculum is that the structure allows us to really tease out those general concepts and also to look at some more micro concepts. Again, something I'd like to touch on, how to teach to those concepts as we come into the fall in the month of August. And then how do I take those concepts? How do I take those learning outcomes and, divide them out throughout the year? There's also the possibility to really focus in on certain themes and, put together all the elements of language or many elements of language. So that being said, what I'd like to propose is, well, what it comes down to is I will share with you, and again, Ashley and Liz, you already have a copy of this, but this is my template that I found that I really enjoy using, that allows me to sort of look at my year at a glance. It allows me to separate my year how I'd like. Do I want to do it by quarters, by semesters? Am I looking at, blocks of 6 weeks at a time? Am I planning by lessons, by units after that? And so this really breaks it all down. And the way this particular teacher broke it down, like I said, is first she divides it into quarters, right? So she's got 4 blocks of 3 months each, well, 3 months each, let's say 2.5 months each. Then there's a table where you can plan by blocks of 6 weeks at a time. And that's really meant to give you what your long-term planning looks like. So from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, these are all the topics I'm going to cover in these timeframes, right? So you could take the document that we just went through and that we highlighted and say, okay, so if I'm going to look at this all year long, well, that I'm going to, throw those ideas, those learning outcomes into each of those slots. Or, well, this is something I just want to cover at the end of the year. Well, this is where it's going to go. And then there's also a weekly planner that allows us, it includes 9 weeks, and it allows you to divide at your will, right? There's one that's really blank, and there's one that's got certain items in it, and I'll show you that as we go through. And really, it's, using that year-long planning and then breaking it down afterwards. I think she's got also links to her site and her blogs, and I think they're really interesting. She teaches ELA. It's an American resource, so she talks about standards and things like that. However, I've taken her planning template, and I've made it, and I've translated it into French, and I've also used the terminology that we use. So if I were to break down my year into 4 parts, or even 2, right? The first 2 blocks would be my first half of the year. The last 2 blocks would be the second half of the year, right? And then it's easy to take that first half of the year and divide it into, and so on. So that's something where you might pull out your organizing ideas and or your learning outcomes. That's what I would really focus on. And as we move on from there, this is an example I used for grade 1 of the different organizing ideas that I would touch from the first quarter all the way to the 4th quarter. And even then, I think I threw in there conventions when I wouldn't normally throw that in for grade 1. But in grade 3, you've got the added, you don't have the phonological awareness, although you might want to put that in. And then you've got the writing as well, right? So like I said, this is just an example of how you might plan, how you might lay it out. And then as we move on, these are the blocks of 6 weeks. And those blocks of 6 weeks allow you to break down the planning even more, right? So to take those learning outcomes and to take maybe certain elements of those learning outcomes. And we're not really looking at lesson planning right now. This is just, this is maybe how you could inform your administrator, your parents. This is how I break down my ELA-L program throughout the whole year. And then, like I said, there's the weekly planning, right? And as I've mentioned before, you really need to keep in mind as you go through this planning that you're going to have students who struggle, and you're going to have not just lessons to teach, but you're going to have work time, right? You want to plan that into all of your planning, all of your subjects that you teach, because, well, that's what needs to be done. That's what needs to happen, right? You do your lesson, you explain everything explicitly, you sit down, you model some of the work, you guide them through it, they do it on their own with your help, and then they're, on their own independently, right? So keeping all of those approaches in mind, you want to plan accordingly. So as you plan, let's say week 1, what concepts in a particular, learning outcome are you going to plan? So this would be the learning outcome, or it could even be a theme, but I'll show you how that works a little bit later on too. So let's say your learning outcome goes here. You take the concepts from that learning outcome. You take, well, here it says résultats d'apprentissage. I would even go so far as to say the habileté procédure. So the skills and procedures might go here, because those are the verbs, right? These are the things we want our students to know and do. This is where I would put particular resources, the material I might be using, the link to a particular website that will give me a video that I'm going to play for my students, whatever the case may be, whatever tools that I might use that would go in this block. And then the notes for the planning would go here. This will also inform the last bit of the presentation I'll show you today. But this goes on for 9 weeks, and then the next pages that are blank, right? So it's not by week, this could even be by month, right? So it's up to you to decide how you do your annual planning with this template. Again, her links to her blogs and how to create those plans are here. I find that interesting, right? Looking at creating unit plans, that's something I'd like to delve into more at the start of next year. You can also consult how she uses her year-long planner. I think it's a very rich resource. All right, and then this goes on to planning by unit or by theme, right? And it's broken down into 30 days. So for a month, let's say I'm going to cover the theme of, I don't know, bullying. It could be, that's the theme you want to cover. You really want to teach that in your class. You want to talk about intimidation, about bullying, about how to be a good friend and things like that. So you bring in all your resources and you plan it out throughout the month. I like to plan that way. I like to plan my projects that way. So this is a good project planner as well. And you would include each day what you're doing with the students, how much time may be dedicated to a lesson, a mini lesson, how much time might be dedicated to group work or project work, and how you might help the students break that down. All right, so that is that resource that I will also share with you. And then as we move on, my last little bit, before I get to those resources and those ideas, I like to go to New Learn Alberta. Now I've already signed myself in. I'm hoping you've all had a chance to sign yourselves in. I have one board already created for grade 1, another one created for grade 2, and I've copied it pretty much for grade 3. I haven't worked on it at all. I've copied. So it's easy to copy a board, right? I'm going to go into it and I'm going to show you how to do this. This says grade 2. So as you can see, I didn't make that change. I did that really quickly. So I can go in and I can edit this. This is what you would see if you didn't have editing capabilities, or if you weren't in editing mode. This is what is a part of this particular board. And the board sections are all based on the organizing ideas in the curriculum. And then within those organizing ideas, I tried to pull out at least one learning outcome. And then So for example, oral language, the outcome I pulled out was students develop listening and speaking skills through sharing stories and information. And I found through New Learn Alberta, this particular resource called Walking Together. And it deals with oral traditions and sharing a story. So there's a video of a teacher and she shares a story with students. And so it really shows you how she uses oral traditions to teach in that particular classroom. And it is a grade 3 classroom that she's addressing. So this is an interesting resource, and you can find many others on New Learn Alberta. It's harder to find the resources, let's say, that are math or phys ed and wellness in French. More of them are in English. So that being the case, I find we're super lucky because there are a ton of resources in English. There are phonics resources, there are lists of words. It's all out there and it can be added to the boards. The other nice thing about boards is that it's collaborative. So I'm sharing this with you today and you're all in collaboration on this board. So that means that I'm inviting you to go in there. And if you have a really great lesson that you love doing with your students, and you've always had success with it, I would invite you to add that. But depending on the learning outcome, and it might touch several learning outcomes. So keeping that in mind as well, you would add perhaps the links to certain, websites here, like I did. There are listening activities in this link. And then you could go on to add lesson notes as well, right? So here I just wrote activities. I started listening and I put the hyperlink in there, but you could write all kinds of things. This is what I do with my students. This is a step-by-step plan on how I do this particular activity with my students, and on it goes, right? So if I'm in editing mode, I can make my changes here, and this is how you do it. Again, I copied it, so I don't want this to be grade 2. I want this to be grade 3. And that's what I wanted to be adding in here. And here I can, like I said, add in anything. So if I'm in activities, if I have another activity that I want to add here, like I said, I could just type it in and I can add a hyperlink. And the other thing I wanted to do was share it. Right, so here I already have your email addresses, right? So like for you, Liz, I think it's your francophone address that worked last time, right? So Liz is automatically added and she can collaborate. I can change that to just view, right? Lecture seul, but for me, that's not the point of boards. The point of boards is to really collaborate together. Right, so as you go away and you think about the things that you like to do, there it will be. Okay, I'm just going to save that and I'll add everybody's name at the end. It'll take me a couple of minutes, and then I believe you get an email inviting you to collaborate on the particular board. What did I want to add to that? Well, for me, it's important to have that collaboration. It's important to have that sharing aspect. To be able to, we're all in our separate little corners. Like I said, oftentimes if I'm a specialist in my school, I'm all by myself and nobody else to talk to unless I have a colleague in another school. So this takes us even outside of our schools, outside of our own conseils, our school boards, and we can collaborate with other teachers. I really like the way this works. Are there any questions about boards? If you're not comfortable with it at this point in time, there's no stress. In the fall, in the month of August, end of August, as we go back for our PED days, there are going to be sessions and not workshops. So coaching sessions with Roch La Rochelle, who will take you through step by step and work with you if you're not comfortable using New Learn Alberta and boards. He's available. So sign up for that if you don't feel comfortable. However, I listened to a 15-minute video on New Learn Alberta on how to use boards right here. And I learned everything I needed to learn. It didn't take me long at all to sort of master how this works. And I'm discovering things as I go along. The nice thing about boards is that I'm pulling directly from the curriculum, right? It's all linked within New Learn Alberta. So I don't have to break my head with, okay, I'm referring to this and I want to cover that. No, it's all right there. And as you can see, the boards that exist, they are already resources for you, right? How to change Y to an I in a spelling pattern, to sample lesson plan for grade 3 and on, right? Morphology, there's a few sample lesson plans depending on the grade, and here we're going beyond, right? We're going grades 4, 5, and 6, so it can be very interesting, right? You can even select what grade it is you're working on, what language or what course it is you're working on, and there you go. You have some grade 3 boards already made, right? Multisyllabic words, character trait vocabulary, morphology, fluency. I recommend you check them out. It could be worth it. And as I go back to my presentation, the other thing, like I said, worth checking out are these sites. So the New Learn Alberta site is there, and you'll get my presentation, so you get those links too. The workshops through the consortium, the Francophone Consortium, the workshops through SAPDC, through ERLC. And again, there are a few consortia. There's the Calgary Regional Consortium, CRC, there's CARC, my goodness, there's a ton. And down here, I will include this as well in the email that I will send out to you today. I found a couple of interesting websites that, just provide extra resources for ELA teachers. And often when I find these ELA websites, I will find linked ELL resources, and I find that really interesting. So like I said, I'm going to be working on that whole ELL or ESL aspect, and brush up on whatever is coming up and coming new this year. I'll work on conceptual understandings to be able to provide for you certain workshops along those lines. I would also like to really focus in on more detailed planning, right? Those are my plans. Now, I'd like to hear from you to see if there's something that I can provide, or some, are there any wishes on your part? The souhait, what would you like to see for next year? In the past, I've heard evaluation.
I think evaluations, that we can use are useful. Resources, like if there's no resources that are in line with the new curriculum, that would be very useful. I had another idea and I lost it.
You'll get it back.
I'll let you know if it comes back.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, and I just wanted to say that the planning that we're doing is very helpful, because I always find it overwhelming to do my, my year. Well, I've been here so long, you'd think that I could just reuse it, but you're always trying to figure out how to make it better and stuff. So I appreciate kind of figuring this out together, and what other, seeing how other people do it, and hopefully having something that we can go forward with, from this. Oftentimes with formations, you just leave and it's time spent and you get good ideas, and that's all great. But it's nice having like, oh wow, I have a good start on my annual plan, or here's my annual plan ready. That's awesome.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I really
appreciate that.
Oh, fantastic. That was my objective today. My goal was to provide you with that, take off a little bit of that pressure, so that instead of feeling like the woman at the beginning, overwhelmed, right? Nose is barely above water, and you're feeling more like this, right? You're feeling more, okay, that's one thing I can check off. I've verified with other colleagues that this is where I should be going. That's me. If I've accomplished that goal, I've done everything I've had to do for today. And now I want to be able to build on that, right? And that's what we do for our students, right? We build on what they feel comfortable now with certain things. Great, now I'm going to push you, stretch you to your limits so that you're really getting the most out of it. So that's my goal for next year. And if you have anything else to add, please feel free. Like I said, you're going to get an email from me today. If you didn't feel like sharing with the group, that's all right. I get it, especially at the beginning of your career, at the beginning of teaching a new subject. That's where we feel the most overwhelmed because we're starting from zero. We're starting from scratch. We feel like we've got no baggage at all. But you have quite a lot of baggage. You learned a lot in university. You learned a lot teaching other subjects. You learned a lot from your colleagues. And my goal is to provide you with more tools and more opportunities to share and to learn together in order to, improve your practice day after day, year after year. So you can respond to that email you're going to get from me. You have my contact information. I'm constantly on Twitter. I retweet all kinds of things because I want to make sure that you know what's out there, what's beneficial to you. So I try and really weed out the stuff that's kind of garbage for the stuff that's really meaningful, useful, but also based in research, right? I don't want to just tell you, go out there and do anything, right? Teaching English language arts and literature can be really tricky, and hopefully the new structure can help you. And I think it's helped us. It's helped me certainly to put together this plan of year at a glance and going forward. That's all I have for today. I think I've spoken to the point where I'm on the brink of losing my voice.